All right, thank you everyone again for joining us today. The webinar is part of NLAN's ACE 2012 webinar series. Today we'll be focusing on creating a poster presentation. With us we have Dr. Spildner from the Latino Commission on AIDS. And today's presentation we'll be focusing on how to create a strong poster presentation. As you know, the International AIDS Conference is coming to the U.S. This summer, and so many of us will be presenting posters, and so this opportunity to try to showcase what are some good things to consider in developing your poster. The flow for today is very simple. Basically, we'll have Dr. Andrew Spildner speak to us and give us some feedback on how to develop a poster, and then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A to ask him some questions that you may have from his presentation or some other questions as you're developing your poster. Also, obviously, these recommendations that he's going to present can transfer to other conferences. And so this is something that could be useful beyond the International AIDS Conference. Following that, we'll be talking a little bit about some activities that are leading up to the conference as well as activities taking place during the International AIDS Conference. So we'll be closing with that, and then we'll end the webinar for today. So now going to our presenter this afternoon, or this morning if you're on the West Coast. Dr. Spildner earned his BA from University of California at Berkeley, his master's at University of California at Los Angeles, and his PhD at Howard University in Washington, D.C. He has held senior positions at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, Black AIDS Institute, and the National Association of People with AIDS. He's currently the Deputy Director of Research and Evaluation at the Latino Commission on AIDS in New York City. Dr. Spildner is openly living with HIV and a long community advocate with 20 years serving high-risk populations, including racial ethnic minorities, gay men, and people living with HIV and AIDS. His research focuses on HIV stigma and disclosure, intercultural communication, health communication, cultural studies, and sexuality. So with that, I invite Dr. Spildner to join us.
Hey, everybody. How are you doing today? We can see the chat, so feel free to ask questions through the chat. Basically, we'll try and get as many of your questions answered as possible. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody today. The first thing I want to ask is how many people have looked at posters before at a conference when they've attended? Just raise your hand. That's great. The majority of people have. So what I'm going to talk about is really kind of the design elements tricks that you can use to make your presentation pop. So a little bit about us and my department here at the Latino Commission on AIDS is, we're based in a CBO, and there was a vision my research partner, Dr. Miriam Vega, had a while ago to really expand and build community knowledge while being based in a CBO. I was brought on board 3 years ago to help build the department. These are the goals of our department, but basically we do several things. We run a very robust internship program with graduate students and undergrads who are interested in doing health work or HIV work. And we just tend to have anywhere from 6 to 10 interns at any semester. We also evaluate our internal programs and help other community-based organizations evaluate their programs. And we've developed research partnerships with universities and developed some of our own research projects. We've written a lot of papers that have been accepted to academic peer-reviewed journals, and we present at conferences a lot. So it's and we guide our own team and kind of how do they make their poster presentations. So some things to remember about a poster presentation is it's not a paper, okay? Posters are a visual communication tool. That means that we have to be concerned with things like graphics, colors, clarity, and directness. Sometimes people think of poster presentations, they're often set aside in some kind of exhibit hall or in a hallway, and what we really want to do is we want your posters to really pop. And one of the reasons for that is because it gives you the opportunity to showcase and get feedback on a specific project. So you'll be standing there at some point. At some point, you'll be standing next to your poster, and people will walk around and ask you questions. And you want the poster to invite them in and be very clear about your point. The other great thing about a poster is that when you're not standing there, your poster is still standing. So people will get a chance to review the kinds of interesting things that you're doing, even when you're not there. So effective posters, basically they focus on a single message. Let graphs and images tell the story. You always want to make sure that the sequence of the data or the sequence that you're trying to walk people through is well ordered and obvious. Don't overload the poster with information. Use different color and fonts to make certain parts of the poster stand out, and use a large font size. So this is just briefly what an effective poster will do. Ineffective posters, the objectives and main points are hard to find. The text is too small. There are poor graphics and poor organization. And we're going to look at some examples at the end of this presentation so that you all can kind of talk to us about whether you find what's effective and what's ineffective about the posters that I'm going to show at the end. The first thing you need to do when you're developing a poster presentation is define your message. Really figure out what you're trying to say and be bold about it. Don't soft title your results. If you have exciting findings, put them right there in the title. That's going to be the first invitation for people to take more interest in what you're showing them. Edit, edit, edit. After you've defined your message, you want to go back, design your poster, and really edit. If it doesn't add to the message, leave it out. Remember, you can use the data at a different time. You don't have to put everything on one poster. And in fact, if you do, it'll look like a kitchen sink, or at least my kitchen sink. So after you've defined your message, and your messages should have been defined in your abstract, but go back to your abstract and really figure out what's the key finding, what's the key moment that you want to highlight in your poster, and then go back and then start setting it up. So how do you set it up? The first thing you need to do is know your audience. There are 3 basic audience types. I've listed them up there. People in your field of specialization, they include your competitors, but remember that no special efforts required to attract them. They'll read whatever you present, no matter how well or poorly you present it. So those are people in your field of specialization. People in fields closely related to yours, they're worth capturing because they can provide you interesting insights and perspectives about your work. But they also will require that you supply context for your work. So they're likely to be unfamiliar with jargon. So if you're in a very, very narrow field or you're narrow casting your findings, remember that you may need to explain some of the context. So for instance, if you're doing things for social media, people may not be familiar with all the platforms. They may be confused between what social media, what social networking, what social marketing. So you really need to kind of think through what's the field that you're talking through. Even though we're all going to be at IAC, which is an AIDS conference, there's lots of ways in which we all specialize in something. And one of the things to remember is that you're going to have people in unrelatable fields or unrelated fields that can be attracted by an accessible message and provide you feedback again. And they're going to require you to explain the problem and solution. They may not understand your language at all. Okay, I have a question from Danielle. For IAC, they have 2 types of poster presentations, oral presentation posters and posters. We're going to I'm going to show you how to create the visual posters and really focus on that. But one of the things to think about for the oral one is you're still going to have the same kinds of concerns around clarity of your message and who your audience is. One of the things to think about is you have to consider your audience when you're going through and developing your language, but you also have to design with all three audiences in mind. So even in an oral presentation, you would need to really know your audience and know how to unpack different ideas. So, in an oral presentation or in a poster presentation that's, you're really going to have to, know your message, stick to it, and unpack your ideas carefully and clearly. I hope that answers that question. And we can have more question and answer in a bit. So,
Andrew.
Yeah.
If I could just jump in as well. The next webinar is going to be on public speaking. And so this sort of oral poster presentations, you need a poster, but also you're going to be speaking. So, hopefully you'll be able to get stuff from this webinar and then next month's webinar. And the next webinar on public speaking is scheduled for May 10th. So I just want to put that out there.
Great. So some things to think about for a poster. Visual grammar is basically having a certain kind of visual language. So if it's not clear to you, or how sometimes people use a lot of different kinds of fonts, or a lot of different elements, like it's too busy and people can't follow it, that's a kind of visual grammar. So you want things to be really clear, and you want the most important parts of your poster to really stick out. The column format will help you balance it and make your poster easier to read in a crowd. Remember that your poster is standing amidst hundreds of others, and you want people to be able to really see very clearly what's going on. Also remember that in most parts of the world, the eye goes from the top to bottom and left to right. That's not true in all parts of the world, but in most parts of the world it is. That's the way people read. In Asia, it's actually the flip side. But you really want to pull the eye from the top to the bottom and left to right. And that's just the way people read. So use headings intelligently. You want to make sure that your headings make sense and that they'll take you to your main points and key information. So one way to think of your headings, if you're presenting on a project, you could go back through your abstract and actually do, a method section. You could follow an article if you'd like, where you do the issue, the method section, how did you collect the data, how did you analyze the data, and then what are the key findings. But there are lots of different ways that you can present the information. You want to balance the placement of text and graphics. We're going to go over balance in a bit, but basically don't overpower one way or the other. The tendency that we have, that a lot of people have, is to make things very text heavy, and that can make it very unattractive. The final point here about the visuals is to use white space creatively. And what I mean by that is to make sure that you don't clutter it. You want to okay, I'm a big comic book nerd, and I'm pretty random, by the way, so everyone just go with it. So if in a comic book there are borders in between the panels, and that helps people understand what order what sequence to read it in. So if you think about what is the white space, what are the borders between your data, or between what you're trying to say? Does that make sense for people? Because sometimes white space can be difficult for people to conceptualize. I wanted to give some examples of what balance can look like, and Let me see if I know how to use the markup tools. I may not be very good at this, so I'm going to bear with me for a second. Okay, so here's white space. And you'll see that the way that this is balanced is through columns, right? So balance occurs when the images and text are reflected. So we have various examples here of how you can get balance in different formats. Yeah, okay. So here is a diagonal balance where you can actually see how the images cascade in a diagonal. So here's the first one, here's the second one, center, and people will be able to follow the reading by that cascade effect. So here's where, in the first one right here, we have a very, very mirror effect going on in both the first and the second one, where you have this second one here that I've just marked up is gridded, and you can actually see how it's a foursquare. And the final thing that I want to point out here is that in all three formats that I wanted to show you about balance, the title and the authors are incredibly important. So I don't want to kind of downplay that. If we don't know what the title is and the author, we won't know what this is about. Was there somebody saying something? Sorry. So questions about balance? Okay. So basic rules about text, minimize it. If you're writing a paragraph, it's too much. So use phrases rather than full sentences. You want to keep all of your text elements to 50 words or fewer. So if we go back one section, all of these text elements should only be 50 words or fewer. So however you choose to define your text elements. Use an active voice. So what do I mean by an active voice? I mean that you should say that something does something, not that something happened to something. So for instance, if you're talking about risk behaviors of women in your community, you wouldn't necessarily say that substance use happened to these women. You would say that these women had a high risk of substance use and explain how you knew that. Does that make sense for people? And it's really important when you're writing to make sure that you use an active voice. Avoid jargon. So it's really hard for us because especially in the field that we're in, a lot of us get really comfortable with certain kinds of language. And we have to remember that not everyone is as comfortable with what we say every day. And so it's actually a good idea when you develop your poster to show it to people. Show it to people in your in your social circles. Show it to people that don't work in the field, and see what they say about it. Does it make sense to them? If it doesn't make sense to them, why doesn't it make sense to them? What is it that is appealing to them, and what's not? And always remember, don't just ask the question, what's appealing to you? Ask, what's not appealing? And because that can teach you something too. And just make it clear. So let's justify your this is very, very, very graphic design. And This is something that we don't necessarily think about unless we're in the graphic design world, but don't center or right justify your text. Always left justify your text. It helps people read. A serif font versus a sans serif font. You want to use a serif font like a Times for most text. It's easier to read. Sans serif fonts are okay for titles and headings, and all that means a serif is a curve in the lettering. So you want to make sure that when you're using your font that you use a serif font that people are able to read versus a sans serif font. For titles and headings, it's okay. Break it up a little. Use your sans serif font. Your text should be at least 24 points in text, 36 for headings, and I can't stress that enough. It should be at least 24 points in text. People need to be able to read it from a distance. A poster is not something people want to walk right up to so that their nose gets flattened up in it. They want to be able to see it from a distance. So 24 point in text, 36 points for headings. You want to pay attention to text size and the figures. So if you're creating graphs to go with your presentation, remember that the text size in the figures has to be large because people need to be able to read what the data point is. And if they can't read the data point from a distance, they're probably not going to understand the graph at all. Title should be at least 5 centimeters tall. So, you want to highlight what your topic is about and who you are. So remember, title and author, 5 centimeters tall. And that sounds really nitty-gritty, but it's something I do with my grad students all the time before they have to present, is go through and make sure that they follow this kind of visual guide. So some final things to consider when you're putting it together is you want to verify the size restrictions for the conference. You want to allow time for printing, allow time and budget for shipping. You may want to invest in a poster case because that can be really annoying to figure out how to get it on a plane and how to get it on a plane without ruining it. So you've got your poster. You also want to develop a handout to share out salient points to conference participants, and that can just be a simple one sheet that just talks about, gives a more narrative to your poster. You may even want to include the abstract that got accepted to IAC in that, as your handout, because that will give them different kinds of information. On both the handout and your poster, your contact information should be available with the logo of your organization and institution. So make sure that your contact information is available. A lot of times in these conferences, people will see something and they'll go, oh, that was kind of interesting, but they don't know how to get back in touch with you. So have business cards. Make sure your contact information is available on the poster and the handouts, and include the logo of your organization or institution. So we're going to look at some examples, and we'll go to the question and answer. And one of the things I want you to think about is, how do you make your poster? So I'm going to show you 2 different posters. They're both taken from the same conference. It's an ecology conference of all things. And I want you to take a look. They have very different styles of creating them, but I also want you all to tell me whether you think it's effective or ineffective and why. So here's the first example. So you can see that these are pieces of paper on graph paper. And this is one way to create a poster. So it's on a poster board that they've just put everything on. So this is one way to do it. So that's a great, we have a question in the chat. What if you have too many authors? Do you need to list all? And the answer is no, you don't. You should list them all, but list the major ones in, the first author should get, obviously, principal billing, but then put the rest of them in a smaller font to fit it in. So don't, if you have, for instance, my name is Spieldenner, takes up a lot of space. I generally would make my name smaller. But the title is really important. Just make sure that the contact information has everybody, because that's the polite thing to do. List everybody on the poster, but the lead, the principal author, should have the top billing. So this is the first poster example. It's the effects of phage-coated seed on nodule occupancy of soybeans. I know, it's not HIV. I prefer to use examples that aren't HIV when I talk in an HIV kind of thing, because I think we can be a little more objective in the way that we can talk about it. So what are some things that people notice in this? Francisco, can we unmute people?
The conference has been unmuted.
So, do we think that this is thanks, Francisco. Do we think that this is an effective or ineffective poster? And what makes it effective and what makes it ineffective?
This is Luisa. I think that because of the background that it's displayed on, it's gray, and then you have the black sheets in which the papers have been glued to. It just makes it very gloomy looking. And I can't tell very well. It appears like the two bottom images are visuals, so it seems like maybe the way the layout of each of the pages should have been done a little differently, because it's not, visually it's not very attractive.
Great. Is there anything about it that you think does kind of pop? Is there anything they did well?
Well, I like the idea of how they lay the sheets on the black, and how it's not sort of a poster as you would think. It's a big sheet of paper with everything sort of pre-designed on it, but something that's sort of a little. It's different for me, and I like that. But I just think they could have done played up those aspects a little better.
Great. Anybody else? Is the flow of information clear to people? Would you know if you saw this? So it's gloomy. It's not, the graphics on the bottom aren't popping. They're not large enough to see. Would people just know automatically where the important information for this is? Well, this is actually one of the challenges with this poster, and I have to say the only thing I think they did right was the title. I think the title's clear and it's big. I think this is a classic example of a bad poster where they actually used the paper that they wrote and just broke it up and put it broke it up as sheets of paper. And you actually see this at academic conferences a lot when people just took the paper they wrote and just put it up. They actually use, which you can't tell from this distance because I wanted to take a picture of it, but when you look, it's 12-point font they're using, so to actually read it, you have to go all the way up to the front. And you're absolutely right, by the way, the graph on the bottom could not be seen unless you went all the way up to the front. So the next example was actually the winner of the posters. Sometimes these things are judged, and it's actually at the same conference that the previous one was at. And this was actually the top poster presentation. So do people want to comment on this one? Does it work for people? What works for people? What doesn't? I know the topic is a little odd. Southern flounder exhibit temperature-dependent sex determination. I go to a lot of odd conferences. what's the layout like for people? Is it clear?
This is Danielle. I think the layout is very clear. It's obviously symmetrical and much easier to read. My only critique would be that bright cobalt blue is just too much for my eyes.
Yeah.
What do you think?
You mean this blue right here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the balance is beautiful on it. It is very clear. I actually love how clear the headings are. And I like these little pictures that they put in, which I thought were nice touches. It's a very clear title. You actually kind of know what it's going to be about. The color is a little abrasive. And it's something to really think about as you want to balance out the colors that you're using. But one of the things that I love is that from a distance, you know exactly which section was what. And so, for instance, I don't really know anything about southern flounders, nor do I know what temperature-dependent sex determination is. But what I knew when I looked at it was where I could find the objective, and then to see what the conclusions were, which was the only thing I was really concerned about, was, what are they really talking about? And for me, I'm not in this field at all. So this was an example of them having a poster that appealed to people that were not only specialists in their field, but also somebody like me who actually walked up to this because I thought the pink was nice. Yeah, that's actually why I first walked up to it. And then I found out that they actually won for Best Poster, and it made sense to me. But yeah, that was, I was like, oh, I don't really know what the methods are, and it's not really my area, so I don't really care. But I wanted to see, number one, I wanted to see what the pink was. And then I looked at the objective, and then I looked at the conclusions. So the other thing is that notice that the results and the conclusions here are separated, and I think sometimes we forget about that. So you really want to make sure that the results are, if you break up a poster like this, and this is a very simple way to do it, is, make sure that the results are just your data. So this should just be what your data is. Your conclusion should be your interpretation of the data. So keep that in mind. And it's a little confusing sometimes, but keep in mind that your results, people just want to see what your overall results were, how many people participated, how many of what kind of race participated, what was the process that people were put through. And your conclusions, don't be afraid to make a statement. Say what you think that this really means and what the impact is on the field. Take a stand. That's really your opportunity to shine and say, this is what this means. And it's hard sometimes. I think we get so used to kind of accommodating other people's points of view or compromising what we actually really believe these findings mean. And it's okay to just say, no, this means X, this means Y, based on this data. So, people may question you, but that's the point of it in this kind of poster presentation, is to have a good back and forth with people and get further, get feedback, get other points of view, and also to provoke some interest in what you're doing. If you're looking at economic survival patterns of HIV-positive African-American women in Chicago, you want people to really, and I use that as an example because a friend of mine does that, Celeste Watkins out of University of Chicago. And, you really want people to get interested in the populations you serve, in the topics that you're going through, and in the processes that you're engaged in. These are additional resources that Francisco put together. So thank you, Francisco. and these are just online places that you can go to get further guides. And we've come to the question and answer component. Anybody have any further questions, clarifications?
Hey, Andrew. This is Julie Nakaimo with the Kentucky Department for Public Health.
Hey.
Hey, so it's funny when you showed that last example. I'm working on a poster currently that had that blue that wasn't too appealing, and I guess I was wondering, do you have some examples of some, I guess, more visually friendly colors?
It really depends on your audience. I think with the author on the example, that blue I think also strikes a certain chord with me anyway, because I see it as what I call CDC blue. Yeah. So I see it and I'm like, oh, it's a CDC presentation. Automatically I start falling asleep. So you want something that's really going to draw people in and draw your audience in, but not be so garish. So you could even go to, if you have the option to go through a color wheel and kind of look at what, how to soften that blue. One of the things that I do, which is something that I think a lot of us don't do, is I look at popular culture and I look at what fashion does to look at what colors are appealing to people. And so one of the things is to go to a website, like go to the Macy's website or go to the Gap website and look at the colors that they're using for the season, and then pick something close to that. And I know that sounds like a really weird exercise to do, but it's actually you'll see how certain colors tend to be more prevalent during different seasons. So you'll actually be able to tie in to that. I would also stay away from anything that looks too branded by a different color, but too branded by a different company. So like I said, that blue to me is CDC blue. I would never use it. It's something, an organization in the last few years, the National AIDS Organization, which shall go unnamed, recently rebranded themselves, and their website used Wachovia bank colors. And the first time I looked at, they had this big launch on their website, and I looked at it, and I said, oh, are you sponsored by Wachovia Bank? And they were like, no. And I said, well, you should probably take a look at the Wachovia Bank colors. And they've since rebranded again. But it's an example of how, you really have to look at what's in the popular culture, look at what's in the environment to really get a sense of what's the color story that you want to tell. Does that make sense?
Yes, that helps. I'll definitely be doing some Google searches.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to tell people to do, but when I want to look at colors and what color stories to use, I look at what stores are selling. Any other questions?
Hello, this is Rosalinda Cano-Hayes from Chicana Federation.
Hey.
Hey, I just want to mention something that I came during the last time that we did a poster presentation in terms of printing. And I used the format for my, what was that, the PowerPoint presentation, I think so.
Yes.
And they have a format that you can use. That what is the best way to, because it takes time to send, the printing, and sometimes in your town you don't have access to facilities that they can print your stuff, and you need to send it to another place to printing, and it's going to take a lot of time. You have any recommendation in terms of printing and indications for the printing and stuff?
Yes, I've seen posters go, first of all, I've seen everything from the really, really fancy print jobs to the more the more handmade ones, and I've actually done those handmade ones myself. And yes, it feels like an arts and crafts exercise, but if that's the resources available, then that's the resources available. And I have no problem with that. I actually think that that's something that those kinds of poster presentations can be just as powerful. With that being said, you should always, and I'm glad you brought it up, I was actually just talking to my team this morning about it, about how long it would take to print. Our printer, we're doing 4 poster presentations, and so our printer needs a week to get them all done and get them in the right size, and we still have to pick out like what kind of paper we want to use. Do we want to use something heavier than paper, that kind of thing. So, always give yourself minimal of a week. But you should start talking to printers now and seeing who in your area would be able to print it up. If it costs too much to go to a printer, then I love that you brought up a PowerPoint example, Rosalinda. PowerPoint is a great way to. It has a way to do posters for you. There's a part of PowerPoint can do it for you, and just print out sections of it and tape it to a larger piece of paper or glue it. It depends on what your skill set is. I would actually ask somebody who's, for instance, I'm not very arts and craftsy, but I have, like, my ex-boyfriend is, so I would ask him to do it for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I took the a draft to Staples, and they did like a black and white, so I had the opportunity to see how we'll show, and I think that is a good exercise to do.
That's great. And how long did it take for them to print at Staples?
Oh, it's like 5 minutes. It's just a draft, like a black and white.
That's great. And then you get to really get a chance to see what it looks like.
Exactly.
That's great. I love that idea.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yes, this is Luisa. I have another question. What if, because the research that I'm doing is on sort of behavioral health and I don't have a lot of graphic data, I want to pull out some of the quotes that I'm getting from some of the interviews that I did. How do I make those stand out? I know definitely I want to use text boxes, but make them stand out so that they don't sort of take away from the rest of the design and take away from the sort of the title, distract from the title and so forth.
So you might want to think about putting the quotes from your participants in italics so people understand visually that it's a quote. Also, you may want to pull different images from Google Images that respond to what you are talking about. So I don't know what your presentation's about, but believe it or not, people have a Google image up for anything. So I would go ahead and start putting your findings into Google and trying to find kind of symbols or images that kind of pop and or that can add kind of a graphic element to it. I'm a qualitative researcher by training, so I always believe that one of the things that you really want to do is make sure that the voice of your participants gets heard, and so make sure that the quotes that you're putting up, differentiate them from the rest of your text. Usually I would italicize them myself, just so they stand apart, and you may want to offset them so that people know they're looking at a text box.
Thank you.
Yeah, you may want to use a different font for your quotes too.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. No problem. Thank you. Anybody else?
Hey, Andrew, this is Julie again with Kentucky. I was curious about, so for example, in our field, HIV, and talking about risk factors and stuff, how would you advise to do, like, say, acronyms like MSM and IDU and stuff like that?
Well, you are going to be at IAC, so I think that IDU is a fairly common acronym. You could, I think IDU is fairly common. Basic rule of acronyms is, you type it out, the word entirely once, and then just put, MSM or IDU in parentheses, and then just use that quote, generally. But for the title, I would actually go ahead and use MSM or IDU. I think Men Who Have Sex with Men is really obnoxious on a title because from a distance, it'll take up your entire title space.
Yeah.
So just put MSM, or you could even put gay, bi, and other MSM. So people, or gay and other MSM, people know what it's about. But I would, definitely, the audience at IAC is going to be people that are also in the field, and that's all kind of common. Those are common acronyms: IDU, MSM. Some of the other ones that people come up with, it's just easier to not use jargon because it's not going to be the same from region to region. So, for instance, I was at a meeting where they were talking about men who have sex with transgendered, and they kept on calling them MSTG. And I honestly had no idea what they were talking about. I was like, what are you saying? And they were like, men who have sex with transgender. I was like, well, that's not very common. That's not a common frame. So, think about that, too, is how much has the acronym permeated the rest of the conversation.
Okay, thanks a bunch.
Sure. Anybody else? Cool. Francisco, do you want to take over?
Right, great. Thank you, everyone. Again, so for some of your colleagues who may have not been able to join us, I just want to quickly, the last couple of minutes, go through some activities that are happening and some opportunities to get folks to the International AIDS Conference. So as you know, it's a very expensive conference. So there are about 40 travel awards that NLAN is leading, and so I wanted to share that with you real quick. But there's a website that we've developed, so all this information that I'm going to speak to you about is on this website. The website is
Thank you. Please stand by.